The education watchdog Ofsted estimates that thousands of children are attending illegal schools in England, hidden from the view of the authorities. The Chief Inspector of Schools, Sir Michael Wilshaw, who set up a new investigatory task force in January, said the youngsters risked being exposed to extremism and radicalisation. Our correspondent, Richard Gulpin, reports.
The crackdown by Ofsted inspectors, which began in January, has already led to more than 100 suspected illegal schools being uncovered in major towns and cities across England. And this believed to be just the tip of the iceberg. Warning notices have been sent to 7 of them. They now face a possibility of prosecution. According to Ofsted, these schools, which are not registered with the Department for Education, are normally set up by groups of parents, apparently using the freedom parents have to home educate their children to cover up what they are actually doing. The BBC understands half of those found so far are of a religious nature, with the largest number of those being Islamic. So Michael Wilshaw, head of Ofsted, fears the children are particularly vulnerable to extremist influences.
I have said quite clearly that we have found extremist literature and we've found unsafe conditions. And certainly in one institution, one of the leaders of the institution certainly had extremist links. So we are worried about the rapid growth of these illegal schools and what it means for our society.
The concerns about safety in these illegal schools include the lack of checks on teachers and their suitability to be working with children. Ofsted said its inspectors had also found unhygienic conditions and serious fire hazards. With the inspectors receiving new information about illegal schools every day, their operation is likely to last a long time.
Between the growth of home education and the number of illegal schools that are now operating, and I'm sure the government is giving this serious attention.
In the experience of your inspectors, what are these illegal or apparently illegal schools like? What sort of buildings are they in?
They're pretty bad. In one of the advice notes I sent before January, I said that there were children operating in filthy, unhygienic conditions, open drains running through some of the premises.
What sort of premises are they?
These are old factory buildings, warehouses, anywhere that these organisations want to set up, often charging parents for the privilege. And these children are not being educated well. The curriculum is being narrowed, often only religion being taught, homophobic literature being found. And of course, the youngsters here are at risk and at risk of radicalisation.
What sort of danger are these children in?
Very serious danger, and we've highlighted not only health and safety risks, but not. Then, of course, the wrong sort of people could be looking after these youngsters and educating them, and they could be associating with people who have extremist views.
I appreciate that your belief is that they're illegal and certainly not registered. Where is the evidence that the education is poor?
Because of what we say. Parents have a right to ensure that their children are well educated, that they're taught well by people who have the necessary accreditation and safeguarding checks. They've got a right to expect that a broad curriculum should be offered. They've got a right to expect that children will achieve good outcomes and that they make good progress. Well, none of those things are happening in some of the institutions that we visit and inspect.
Why would a parent put their child in an establishment like that? Why would a parent pay to put their child in an establishment like that?
Well, that's the question we ask. They shouldn't be doing this.
Why would a parent put their child in an establishment like that? Why would a parent pay to put their child in an establishment like that?
Well, that's the question we ask. They shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing this. There's nothing wrong with a parent wanting their child to be home educated, and that's something that's been enshrined in statute for a very long time. And if parents want to do that, then they've got to inform the local authority that they're doing it. The local authority visits to check that a reasonable education is being offered. And that's fine. That's gone on for years. But what's happening now is a growth of home education. People who want to circumvent and subvert the law, really, or abuse the law, and set up with other parents and other families these schools out of public scrutiny, not registered with the Department of Education, and not regulated by Ofsted.
But is
and
the
local authority not being informed.
But is the answer to my question? I was interested in what the parents' motivation might be. I mean, if you're finding schools that are terrible, why would a parent want to put their child in?
Because those parents do not want mainstream education.
Because
because they're not satisfied with it.
But is the answer to my question? I was interested in what the parents' motivation might be. I mean, if you're finding schools that are terrible, why would a parent want to put their child in?
Because those parents do not want mainstream education.
Because
because they're not satisfied with it. Because they believe that music, for example, would be taught, or the creative subjects would be taught, which they disapprove of. So this is
religion.
So they're opting out of the system.
In every case?
I suspect in every case.
In every case?
I suspect in every case.
In every case?
I suspect in every case. And some religious leaders would be encouraging, and that's certainly something our inspectors have found, some religious leaders are encouraging their parents to do this.
Really? Which
Now that's dangerous for the children that go to these institutions.
Which leaders are doing that?
Well, some leaders in the Muslim community are doing it, and some leaders in the Jewish community are doing it.
Which leaders are doing that?
Well, some leaders in the Muslim community are doing it, and some leaders in the Jewish community are doing it.
What can the authorities do about this?
Well, we're encouraging government to look at the laws around home education and to tighten them up.
What can the authorities do about this?
Well, we're encouraging government to look at the laws around home education and to tighten them up.
What can the authorities do about this?
Well, we're encouraging government to look at the laws around home education and to tighten them up. And
sorry, just to be clear, are you suggesting that these establishments might be operating within the law?
Well, they're not operating within the law because it is absolutely essential, and it is a requirement on parents, if they're going to home educate their children, to inform somebody that that's happening. These children are going to places that no one knows about. The local authority doesn't know that these places exist. So we're worried about that. And if parents want to take their children away from school and educate them at home, they are duty-bound to inform the local authority that is happening, where the location is, so that Ofsted can look at it and the local authority can look at it.
What I'm driving at is, does the law, as currently constituted, provide you and others with the powers to shut these places down and get the children into properly authorised schools?
Well, if we find illegal schools operating where no one knows where these children are and what's happening in them, then we have the powers to investigate and, if necessary, prosecute.
One final thought, at the risk of drawing you into politics. Labour says the government's education policy has led to a fragmented school system, lacking robust local oversight to spot these problems. What do you think?
Well, I think there has to be oversight. There has to be local oversight of what's happening in our school system, whether it's done by the local authority or by the newly appointed regional schools commissioners.
And is it lacking now?
And if it isn't happening, we'll see the growth of these institutions. So it's really important that local authorities, and I have to emphasise this, local authorities are still charged with the responsibility of safeguarding all children, whether they go to a local authority school, an academy, or a free school. And if these places are proliferating in local authority areas, it is their responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen.
What do you think just finally accounts for the shortfall? There's clearly a gap.
Well, local authorities need the resources to do it. And if they
haven't
got the resources, the human resources to investigate what's happening and to have the intelligence on the ground about what's happening, then that's a serious worry.
Thank you very much. That's England's Chief Inspector of Schools, Sir Michael Wilshaw. Lucy Powell is Labour's Shadow Education Secretary. What would Labour do differently?
Well, look, I think it's a very worrying report that Michael Wilshaw has found today, and I think his interview would amaze and astound any parent listening to your programme. And he's absolutely right. We do need to have more robust local oversight in the system here, and that is now lacking considerably in many parts of the country in terms of the local authorities. And it's not just have they got the powers and the requirement to do that job, but have they crucially got that resource and that capacity? And what we've seen with the fragmentation of the school system is that the constant undermining of the role of the local authority is we're seeing that greatly diminished, and that capacity is going and gone from many local authorities.
Well, as you heard Sir Michael say, sorry to interrupt, as you heard Sir Michael say, it's still the local authority's job to investigate in these circumstances.
It is their responsibility, but the question is, have they got the resources and the capacity to carry out that responsibility? And my argument is they absolutely haven't.
Yes,
and
but you're trying to make a link between what you call the fragmentation of the education system and this, and I'm suggesting it's really about local authorities and what they do with their money.
Well, it is connected because the local authorities, used to have a much clearer role that wasn't being undermined by stealth by the government for oversight of all schools. That role is by stealth disappearing, and with it the capacity to do that. And that is what is happening. So while we can say, yes, the local authorities still have the legal requirement to do this, if you have taken away capacity, if you have taken away powers, if you have taken away resources from the local authority to carry out that duty, then that duty itself becomes fairly meaningless. And this is going to get worse because the government are now taking away the last bit of resource that was coming to local authorities to oversee education. That is now disappearing in the latest financial round. So this problem is going to get considerably worse, and what is being put in its place, as Michael Wilshaw just said there, are the regional schools commissioners. This is the government's answer to the sort of middle tier question, but they already have an impossible job. They oversee huge geographical parts of the country, thousands of schools already. Their agenda is very much as being driven by the government to academise schools and to speed up that process of academisation.
All right, but just on the subject of money, you've suggested that without proper funding, the powers local authorities have in this area is meaningless. Should we assume that Labour would give the local authorities more money to do this kind of work?
Yes, absolutely, we would. I mean, if you look at a place like mine in Manchester, where some of these schools operate, the education department in the local authority there, I think, is 3 people. That is to do a huge amount of work in terms of place planning, in terms of admissions policies, in terms of overseeing schools, let alone these illegal establishments. So, yes, we wouldn't implement what the government are about to do, which is stripping away the last bit of resource that local authorities have got.
Thank you.
And we'll look at how we can properly resource it.
Thank you. Speaking for Labour on education, that's Lucy Powell, and as I said, the Department for Education declined to be interviewed on PM. Chris has the headlines.
Ofsted inspectors have discovered more than 100 illegal schools across England, most of them religious. They say thousands of children are at risk of harm or indoctrination.